Welcome back to Media 7, where we're weighing up what is on and what is really off the record, and what perils lie between the two. With me now are the producer of TV1's Close Up, Mike Valentine, 3 News political editor Duncan Garner, TV3 current affairs reporter and producer Amanda Miller, and the head of the School of Political Science and Communication at the University of Canterbury, Jim Tully. Welcome to you all. Now, I should say that when we thought about this topic, we realised there were 2 dimensions to the idea of something being off the record. One is when someone says something they don't expect to be reported, and the other is when people say things they want reported, just not with their name on it. So we'll try and cover both in the time we have. Mike, let's go to you first.
Surprisingly.
Indeed. Now, the idea that perhaps you had a bias in the way you handled that story because of the connection to the Herald on Sunday.
Look, it's nonsense. I mean, anybody that knows me and my wife, we don't have pillow talk, you know. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You know? We literally can't because we're on opposing media, and it's bizarre, I know, but it's
I'm not the gossip columnist, Mike.
But, I mean, look, it was brought up by one of my producers as a subject. It was discussed at a planning meeting, and we all thought it was a great idea.
Was the idea to always edit the Saunders interview the way you did it?
Well, I mean, you never know how you're going to edit until you've got the footage, and I left that largely to the reporter, but he came back, he's a young reporter, and it was just such bizarre television, I've got to say, for somebody who's supposedly media savvy. I just couldn't believe it. A minute there of winking and carrying on and not answering a question. I mean, clearly she could have got out of it at any point by, as I think you said earlier, that she could have just said, well, no comment, yes, no, and it would have been over and we would have moved on. You know, she said herself she was silly and naive, and you have to agree, and you know, I think she's a really nice person, but it's pretty sad. Whose idea
was that line about turning the tables? Because there was something loaded into there about the idea that she had it coming.
Well, no, it was one small part of an hour-long interview. I think there were 2 or 3 questions.
It was the way you set it up. It was the way you set up the story on the program, turning the tables on the gossip queen. Oh,
well, in a sense, that all changed because of her response. I mean, in the end, what you do, you don't go out and do a structure before you start a story. You go out and do the interview and you think, what's here? What's going to be the most compelling, interesting part of that? And that's just how it turned out. I mean, if she said no comment and hadn't, you know, we'd have moved on, that wouldn't have been part of it. But it was just an incredible naivety, I thought.
And you can promise me it wasn't because you're one of those telly types that have the orgies that she writes about.
Oh, no. I wish at my age,
I wonder whether you were perhaps so focused on the gotcha that you did miss the story, because you did know that there was a pending legal action that you could have at least known. I mean, in the end, the Sunday News scooped you on it.
Well, they didn't scoop it. They've been reporting it for some time, and in fact, it was at. I got a call from Rachel's lawyer asking us not to go down that track, and in the end, there was far more interesting stuff than that. I mean, that's to be played out in the courts, and we're very, you know, because of sub judice, we're really restricted in what we could say. So, and the other stuff was just compelling. I mean, I thought it was a really compelling insight, and 99.9% of the people I've talked to thought it was too. Of somebody that has sat there and been, apart from a photo, relatively anonymous and attacked people, and you know, and have upset a lot of people. So,
sounds like you think she did have it coming. But Duncan, you were on the other side of the camera of the Melissa Lee interview. It's been pointed out to me that although she's now an MP, she was behaving like a journalist who's used to having control in the editing suite and being able to do over anything she doesn't feel is right. Do you think that was what was going on there?
I certainly think that she is extraordinarily confident and thinks that she's got the measure of television or whatever. And that day, just put some context into it, that day she had refused to go to a meeting on the Super City, and she said to me, look, I'm telling people on the doorsteps what it's all about. So it was a very sort of inane question, really. I said, well, what are you telling them? And it wasn't a trap of any sort. And then she had a minder on my right and 2 minders checking their texts and lotto tickets on the other side. And then she started looking blankly at me, and I thought, this is gold. You know, here's a woman who says that she's the answer for Mount Albert. She's got all the answers on the Super City, you know, very controversial move up here in Auckland. And for 31 seconds, she was blank. That comes in the context of an MP and a woman under pressure. So, you know, I mean, no one has said to me we shouldn't have run it. I mean, we had it online. in the afternoon on the 3 News website. Now, had I edited that out, everyone here would have been gone online and said, "Oh, why wasn't the bloggers? You guys would have been, why wasn't Garner running that? Melissa Lee stuffing up." So we had to put it into the context. It wasn't the first bit we put in the story.
I presume you do all your pieces to camera first take.
Of course not. Get real. But we do our live. But what you have to, MPs have to consider this live. They do have to consider these interviews live, and it would be the same in current affairs. If someone was to break down and say, start again, you've used it, and I've seen that sort of technique used, and I make no apologies for it.
I think particularly for politicians, when they are so knowledgeable about the territory and they accept that every time they walk into a room with a camera, this is their sport. They have to deliver. But I will say, sometimes in current affairs, if you're dealing with particularly vulnerable people and there's a lot of context or build-up that's gone into that interview and things go terribly wrong, of course you've got to judge those situations and say, look, let's be
this woman's not a victim.
And the other thing is
she has all the minders around her and she's fair game.
And she's also incredibly skilled in media. She works in television, for goodness sake. That's what surprised me was listening, trying to get sense of what she was trying to say. I thought, hello.
Well, you should hear the last 3 minutes. You argued she made it clear afterwards. Oh, I'm not sure she did. To be honest.
Is there a temptation, and I know current affairs is slightly different from news, but would there be a temptation, say, if you had someone as an exclusive, to not use the part where they had the brain fade?
Oh, look, I wouldn't dare make that decision without knowing what the context is and what the interview is. What happens in current affairs is, quite honestly, we spend a lot of time dealing with talent off the record, because a lot of the time, in order to get their trust and faith and to do a longer format story, you've actually got to get them to understand and have faith in the way that they think that they can tell their story to you.
And you're seeing it in that instance as dealing with talent, trying to get people ready to be on camera, rather than the
Totally.
Speaking truth to power.
And often there are court cases and you've got to say, this person's talking to you saying, look, this is coming up, I cannot say anything on the record, but I can talk to you about whatever. I like it it's a bit of a seduction process, if you like, that you can spend a long time developing the relationship, and working out the nuances and the parameters and getting to know each other, yada, yada, yada. But the minute that camera is in front of that person, you're in the bedroom. You're ready for business.
Yes. Jim Tully. Indeed, yes. Well, we'll talk about the one that wasn't nowhere near the bedroom and had Michael Cullen in it, which I don't think is anywhere near the bedroom either. That was an interesting one, the Guy Spinner's interview with Michael Cullen, because what Cullen thought was off-camera banter became the angle of the story, and he was most upset. A member of the public complained to the BSA who said, well, tough luck. Was that the right decision?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if you're in public life, and particularly a politician, be it Cullen or Melissa Lee, you've got to accept that everything you say is going to be recorded. There are no expectations, I don't think, that you're going to be just talking to yourself. If you watch that Yes Minister wonderful episode where Sir Humphrey kept rattling on after the interview had finished, I think that's a lesson for every politician. You assume that you are being filmed and it's all on the record.
The interesting thing, the only point I'd make about this Cullen and Guyan's interview is, why did it take 4 days to get to air? You see, because it happened on the Monday and it didn't get to air till the Thursday. Ralston, who was head of news at TVNZ at the time, intervened. Why did that not go to air Monday night?
Can you
Why
shed
not
any light
Tuesday?
for us?
Why
No,
not
I
Wednesday?
can't. I wasn't involved. I was in current affairs at that point. And,
Yeah, but that's a legitimate
So
question.
do you think then, Duncan, perhaps they were sitting on it thinking,
should we do this? Should we not
do this?
And I know at TV3, if we'd got that, it would have been on telly on Monday night. No questions asked.
Right.
Would have been. And I tell you, as a result of that episode with Guyan and Cullen, you'll find when you go into an MP's office now, they're looking around at your camera, they're looking to see if you've got a secret tape in your pocket.
And these are people who've had media training.
Yeah, but that was very different, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The camera was there were 5 people around.
It was setting up. It was set up. You saw the flag moving in the background, I think,
put
from
the microphone
clip
on him.
there.
He knew it was all go.
Yeah.
And,
I
and
think
to
it's
turn around
I
afterwards and say, I didn't. It's
fair
ridiculous.
cop. Yeah, fair cop. Yep.
Is that an unusual situation, something like that? Does that happen very often, where people say things that they think aren't part of the process? and find them reported?
No,
very
I don't
rare,
think so.
very rare. I don't know of too many examples, and I've been
I
around a
can't
year
imagine.
or two.
It's very rare that happens. I think people are, again, it's like training for a big sporting event, which I think is something that came out in Bridget's interview. If you're going to sit down and do a TV interview, you've got to train. You've got to get your head around what you've got to say, your behaviour, you know, what's happening. I've got to. You don't see Sampras or some top-notch Tiger Woods walking off halfway through a game of golf and going, oh, look, I'll just have another try at that, or I'll come back in 5 minutes. It doesn't work like that. You're there to do the business.
You can't argue that Cullen was naive and inexperienced. No. I mean, you know, he was just stupid that day.
Yeah. And my advice to young reporters is simply this, that, don't be fearful of asking a tough question, because most interviewees have gone through it and have gone through much tougher questions than you're ever going to ask.
Yeah.
So they've rehearsed it in their mind, and they're well aware of it. So I think journalists have...
Well, Jim, you're the educator. What do you say to young trainee journalists about these kinds of issues? Are there things is there a barrier there, a border there?
Well, three key messages really. One is that everything is on the record unless it's specifically negotiated as off the record before it is said. Secondly, that information on the record is always preferable to information off the record. It's more authoritative, it's more convincing. And thirdly, if you get it off the record, you should do your best to independently verify anyway, otherwise you could be being used and abused by your sources. But I think people these days have to just accept that from the moment that conversation begins, it's going to be used, and I'm quite relaxed about that.
Yeah, just before the election last year, I was at the Wellington airport with Guy, and we were coming to Auckland for some political story, and Mike Williams, who was the Labour Party president, came up to us and, "G'day fellas, how are you?" "Good, thanks, Mike." "Oh God, I offered Helen my resignation over this whole Owen Glenn affair." And I said, "Did you?" "Yeah, he did." And Guy and I looked at each other. "There's tonight's story." And Williams went away for a quick durry, came back and said, "Oh, that's off the record, by the way." And we sort of nodded, "Whatever, Mike." Sat on the plane for an hour, got the cameras out to Helen Clark, where she confirmed it. So we were able to, we would have gone with it anyway. Had Clark said, no, that wasn't the case, we would have then had a he said, she said story. But at the end of the day, that was never going to be off the record, because he tried to strike a deal with us afterwards. I mean, get real.
I imagine, though, there are situations where, as a parliamentary reporter, you can't do that, because you could afford to burn Mike Williams because he was on his way out.
Correct.
I imagine there are times when you can't do that.
There was an infamous few drinks with John Key,
which has become part of legend, but...
Yeah, on the blogosphere, yeah, about what he was supposedly said about Jerry and everything else. Look, Key probably gave us 20 lead stories that night, actually, and I have used a lot of the information in commentary and live crosses and so forth since. And, you know, I mean, immediately I came back and wrote a blog saying, "I bet you Peter Sharples becomes the Māori Affairs Minister." I don't know anything, but I reckon this is the way Key's going. You know, I did. It might have been off the record, but I used it unsourced.
Yeah. What kind of off the record was that? Was that the you can report this, but I didn't say it, or I've had a few drinks and I'm losing track of what I'm saying?
He actually got a bit looser as the night went on. Once we got him down to Matterhorn, it was we sort of took him to a cab for his own safety, really. But you know, I mean, but I learnt more in that 3 or 4 hours of drinking with Key than I've learned in other, you know, sort of formal situations. You learn nothing formally.
And a lot with the pollies, you know, I mean, they give you a lot off the record, and it basically means use it, but don't attribute it. And you use it, and you go to other sources to check it, and so you're not being
judgment.
used yourself.
You know, when you're in these situations with politicians or people that are giving you some vital information, you are balancing that with what kind of relationship you have with that person. And if you're going back to these people all the time, you don't want to sour that relationship.
No, you don't. Which is why, with the Key one, he was about to become Prime Minister, according to all the polls, and we were pretty sure he was probably going to be. So what do we do? I must admit, I was a bit nervous next day, checking out where, you know, because I was out with Guy that night, checking out what he was doing down the corridor that day in case he was about to burn both of us, because, you know, Guy and I did a bit of a deal. Oh, we better not, you know, use this formally tonight, but it will spread out, you know, will leak out over time, and it did in the Sunday Star Times about a year later.
Now, Jim, I was interested to hear you say before that it is permissible to go off the record so long as it's agreed in advance. So there are situations where it's appropriate.
Oh yes, there can be, and I think I've been party one myself where a GP gave me information about a couple who had committed a suicide pact, and what he said about them was probably unethical in terms of his medical training, but it made us work away from the story. We accepted that the situation that couple was in was was so peculiar and unusual that it wasn't appropriate to make a story about that. I mean, you exercise your judgment, but I mean, the thing is, once you've made that commitment that it's off the record, you're bound by that. And I think one of the reasons why some people...
I was going to ask you about, to what extent are you bound by that? Are you bound by your journalistic ethics, by your relationship with the subject, by what? It's not by law, clearly.
We have an aspect of law called breach of confidence that is worth looking at in that context. But I mean, I think from the perspective of off the record, sometimes it's best not to hear anything off the record because you don't want to be compromised if you hear it from somewhere else and you feel you can't use it because you're going to be seen to have betrayed that confidence.
Which
so
is
some
a very
journalists
hard
won't hear
thing
it.
for a journalist to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
To say, don't tell me information.
Of course.
But do
Sometimes
you
have
guys
to.
all do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going down a road where you think you're going to be trapped into that
Yeah.
position, and you know, I've done it many times, and
Yeah.
everybody here has without a doubt.
You have to.
And
And
if
you
somebody
can go back
says
with
to
a
you,
clear conscience.
I'll tell you something, but you know, don't tell anyone else. Your ear and antennae are going to to flap, of course.
That usually screams lead story, doesn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, have you been in situations, any of you, where you've felt you're being worked by your source and you're trapped into it because you've given this undertaking of confidentiality? Because I can only assume that happens.
I think there are situations where you are often thinking, am I being manipulated to a certain extent because they're in control of this information. There's only a certain amount that they want to get through. Am I getting what I need, and do I need to know that? Yeah, it's really hard to kind of second guess because you don't know what you don't know.
But you have to sort out the manipulators, don't you?
Yeah,
I mean, you know,
do.
you kind of figure
Instinct
them.
is a very strong weapon.
Yeah,
I mean, that also happens in Parliament too, when an MP, say like a Trevor Mallard, will come to you and say, look, this is what I'm hearing about this and this. No documentation to back it up, and his ultimate aim is to make not only himself look good, but that person to go down. So you've really got to balance that. It's got to be backed up with something, and a lot of the time in Parliament, it's actually not, ever.
So when do you reach the point where you, if Trevor Mallard's doing that and you think he's crossed the line, when do you reach the point where you drop him in it?
Well,
saying Trevor Mallard is spreading rumours about this and that.
Oh, you might do it over a beer later on in the bar.
So you wouldn't actually make that your story because he...
No, you wouldn't make it your story because that's a source that will come back to you. You've got to be very careful about dropping MPs in at Parliament because, to me, they're all sources at some stage, but they're also, at some stage, all going to become a victim, aren't they, if you look at it at that level. So it does swing around about. So you just have to take the information at face value, go away and try and stack it up yourself. And you will know some MPs are more reliable than others. And, I mean, Rodney Hyde was extraordinarily reliable early on when he came to Parliament with some of his hits. I was at TVZ at the time. We benefited from a lot of the information. But what he did, he acted like a journalist very early on, got it all stacked up and came to you, and there weren't too many more I's to dot. Some MPs are actually quite lazy. They'll come to you with some rumour or innuendo, and you have to stack it up. So you kind of know who's good and who's not.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Bugger, isn't it?
but you know who's good and who's not.
Isn't there a danger of being worked by your source if they come along and say, here you go?
Correct,
Because that happens all
absolutely.
the
Which is
time.
why you have to...
That's your job.
apply
You
the
have to
jobs.
counter
Yeah,
that and
yeah.
get that information. Say,
Test
well,
it.
who else? Yeah, test it. Let's
Yeah.
go to this person and see what they make of this.
Yeah,
And often he
I
turns
imagine
his
a
whole
good
story
tip is
round,
one
you
that,
know?
say, leads you to make the right OIA request, which
Correct.
is hard to do in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And so they'll give you the right wording and the title of the report to go for and so forth. Those are some of the best tips in Parliament.
Absolutely.
You know.
It's great for whistleblowers, you know,
Yeah.
that they can give you stuff off the record, that tips
Yeah.
which get you on that trail to get the great story.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a very valuable tool used wisely. But
So, Jim.
I was going to say, so you independently verify because the leak might be an old report that's been superseded, or maybe it was a whole series of options that were never going to be flyers politically, but somebody with an agenda is giving it to you. So the more you independently verify, the better.
Well, I think we could talk about this for quite a bit longer. Maybe we can in the bar, off the record. But we will have to conclude our discussion here. Thanks to our panellists, Mike Valentine, Duncan Garner, Amanda Miller and Jim Tully. We'll be back soon to talk about capturing images of the worst times with Jim McMillan. But to take us to the break, it's Newsmash. We have become so used to the outrageous outpourings of Fox News hosts that it's easy to make light of the hyperbole and vicious sentiment. But there was nothing to laugh about when Dr. George Tiller was shot by a right-wing extremist on a Sunday morning at church.
He was a mass murderer. He sowed death. And then he reaped death in a horrifying way.
The suspect is said to have compared Tiller, who provided legal late-term abortions under strict state laws, to the Nazi doctor Josef Mengele. Where might he have got that idea?
There is a doctor, George Tiller, who will execute babies for $5,000.
Dr. George Tiller, known as Tiller the Baby Killer, Tiller the Baby Killer.
The notorious Tiller, the baby killer. I wanted George Tiller, Tiller the baby killer, going, hey, I can make more money killing babies now.
That's Fox News host Bill O'Reilly, who is not one to let the truth get in the way of hysteria. More media brutality. Amid rumours last week that Britain's Got Talent contestant Susan Boyle was having trouble coping with sudden fame, the Sun newspaper ran this story. It claimed that the singer had unleashed a foul-mouthed tirade against two strangers who taunted her in the lobby of her hotel. The police, said the Sun, had to intervene. A spokesman for the show later identified these strangers as journalists who were ejected by police. Did the Sun deliberately set out to upset her for the sake of a story? By Saturday night, after losing the show's public vote to a dance troupe, Boyle was falling apart. She was taken to a private clinic and the Sun ran this troubling photograph. Elsewhere, in nihilistic media spectacle news, Sonny Bill Williams, who can't really box, won a high-profile boxing match against some bum who seriously couldn't box. And Sacha Baron Cohen, as Bruno, managed to get his balls in the face of recovering rapper Eminem, who then stormed out of the MTV Europe Awards. But some people thought that too was a setup. Mothers, don't let your sons grow up to be anything to do with the media.